Welcome to Restore the Glory podcast. My name is Jake Khym.
And I'm Bob Schuchts.
We're two Catholic therapists sharing what we've learned personally and professionally to help you on the journey of restoration.
If you've been blessed by our podcast, please prayerfully consider partnering with us on Patreon. Your support will help cover the cost to produce the podcast, but will also give you access to exclusive content like monthly reflections and special live stream teachings. Go to patreon.com/restoretheglory and join the mission of experiencing the restoration of our God-given glory.
Hey, Bob. Good to be back with you again. I just want to let our listeners know I'm battling a little bit of a cold, so if I sound weird, you're welcome. I don't know what to say about that, but if I sound weird, I apologize. Bob, we had a great episode last with Dr. Peter. That was a special episode, eh?
Yeah, it was. I think both of us, just because as a therapist, you end up working with parts and people and when in your own self and that, but just to hear his depth of knowledge and the way he's integrated it with his faith, it was really heartening to hear that. I hope the listeners were as heartened as I was and you were.
I agree. One of the things I appreciated about it was you would know this maybe more than most people. I don't want to say anybody, but you would be in this class of people that really knows this, how hard it is to integrate psychology and Catholicism well.
Yeah.
It is not an easy task to take. It's like, when you're doing those circuits or it feels like when you're doing brain science and you're taking this neuron has to connect to that one and you link them. That's tedious. Is that true?
Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know if tedious is the right word, but
fair enough.
There's a soberness that I have with it that is, the theological truth and spiritual reality is so central.
Yes.
That you don't want to make a misstep.
That's good.
And you have to have a level of freedom of your heart to know that it's going to be imperfect. And I think that's what Peter was speaking to well.
Right.
But, you talk about concepts of soul as an example, and soul is the word psychology comes from the word soul.
Right.
And so it's the domain of psychology, but it's also the domain of spirituality because we focus on the soul.
Yes.
And the relation of the soul to the body and the soul and the spirit. If, the Greek separate the soul and spirit, and the Hebrew has them as synonymous, and in Catholicism we talk about it both ways. And so, when you start talking about heart and you start talking about soul and you start talking about mind and, you're dealing with invisible realities, and we may use the same term in different ways, spiritually and psychologically, even though they're one thing in us, so there's a lot there. And I think, particularly when we start talking about parts of us, parts of our soul, and, the discussion we got in last time about original sin. And it was a very interesting statement that he made that he believes that parts were present prior to the fall, that it wasn't an effect of the trauma or the sin.
Yes.
But it's the way that we were created.
Right.
I'm going to spend more time with that because I really haven't thought through that. I've always been on the side of this. The parts are because of the separation in us.
Yes.
And not because of how God created us. But, when you use the example of the Trinity or the jazz band, that makes a lot of sense, right?
It sure does.
And then Aquinas talks about the mind and the will, those are parts, right?
Yes. That's how I thought about it, was from the point of view, I can see what was his phrase again? Unity and diversity or something like that?
Yeah,
or unity
something like that.
Anyway. Yeah. When you take the mind and you take emotions and you do have to distinguish various elements that come together to make up the thing.
Yeah. And there's certainly parts of our brains as we're studying in brain science that have different functions, right?
Absolutely. Still one brain though.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was an interesting part of the conversation because, and listeners, if you're wondering, why does this matter? Something I think in psychology and theology, anthropology, is understanding what the human person was before the fall is very important because that's where you get your baseline. Then you can compare and look at things after the fall, because after the fall, it's distorted or disrupted by sin. And so the question of, was there parts before the fall, is a really important dynamic, because it would make sense that the fall caused disunity. That's just an interesting reflection and question.
Yeah, and I like the jazz band analogy. It's like the jazz band can be in harmony,
Totally.
which are all the parts working together, or it can be in disharmony or even non-functioning.
Right.
And that's because of some kind of discordance rather than, harmony.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes that I've got a weird trumpet player that's like blaring like off key and just like, everybody listen to me. It's like, buddy, it's okay. Let's calm down a little bit. That's when people are like, whoa, okay,
Yeah.
interesting show here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I have a lead singer who's afraid to sing sometimes.
Interesting. That's so, there's a lot there that we could play with. But one of the things I think that's, I get excited about all of our guests, but particularly with Dr. Peter, in my work, in my clinical practice, the concept of parts work or working with parts has been around since I started my practice and since I've started working with people. And so having somebody that had devoted 2 decades roughly to the integration and understanding of how to do it was really exciting for me, because it's a major lens that I look through when I work with people. So internal family systems, that'd be the primary kind of modality, I guess, that Dr. Peter would start from or reference. That's been around for a long time. Ego state therapy was something I learned in grad school and really liked, and those kinds of things. So I find it so helpful. And maybe here's a little bit about why I find it helpful. So if you take like a cognitive approach to healing and integration, et cetera, I find that that's okay, like a cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, very well researched, very kind of known. What's different about a cognitive behavioral therapy versus an IFS, for me and my using of it, is the IFS activates relational dynamics.
Internal family systems is IFS, right?
Correct. Thank you. And when I'm doing IFS or parts work, it's inherently relational, which to me is essential and central to the human person. Where if you go in the hierarchy of things, I would put, and maybe I'm making a mistake here, but I would put cognition down the line a little bit from relationality. And so I'm working with a more primary dimension of the human person when I'm activating relational things, even in my relationship with myself. And I found that it activates, I can relate to myself. I can be kind or not kind, but I don't know what to do with, am I kind or not kind to a lie that I believe? It makes it a bit more stale. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah. There's a sterility to just staying in the intellect.
Yeah. And the cognition. Yeah.
The cognition and the thoughts.
Yeah.
Even though the thoughts and the emotions are very interconnected.
Absolutely.
And one leads to the other. But yeah. Yeah. As I think on my own experience, I think it's inevitable when you're working with somebody that you begin to realize there are conscious and unconscious factors involved, and the cognitions are often more conscious and the relational things are oftentimes less conscious.
Sure.
And so I think that goes way back in terms of understanding psychology, is that there's more operating than what we're conscious of.
Yes.
But then I think when I really became very conscious of working with parts was when my work with satanic ritual abuse and recognizing how they intentionally divided the person to be able to control them and manipulate them. And, the extreme dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
And so as I began to work in that arena, you realize you couldn't do the work unless you attended to the different parts. And, that's where I became familiar with parts that are protective, that are there to keep safety.
Yes.
And then there are traumatized parts of the person. And then there are parts that are spiritual, have a relationship with God, and other parts that have a relationship with Satan in that situation, And it just seemed really weird. I remember talking about it with my fellow therapist at the time, and it was interesting that they were running into a lot of the same stuff. And
Huh.
out of that work, my partner at the time is a guy by the name of Father Andy Miller,
Yeah.
who is the founder of HeartSync, which is really focused on parts. And
Yes.
he then took the model that he learned from working with dissociative identity disorder and recognized that it's for all of us, that we all have that same structure, which then led me into internal family systems. So I came in the back door, if
Yeah.
you will.
Yeah. I'm very appreciative of Father Andy and HeartSync. They're all similar domains,
They
right? They
are.
all talk about this,
Yeah.
where it sounds like IFS is more, it's like there's a part of me almost like a real person in a way, where
Yes.
HeartSync is a little bit more muted in that. It's more of like
Yeah.
a part of me that's emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It differentiates it. And I think part of that is to keep the language of the wholeness of the person.
Yeah.
That was this danger I saw with some of the practitioners who were getting into dissociative identity disorders, almost like they were treating different people
Yes.
rather than one person.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Can I give an example of something that'll make this really simple for people? And
Please.
it's a really powerful experience. And I've asked the young woman who now is a college student if I could share her story, and she said yes. But it's just a real simple illustration of the value of parts work and integration and the healing of self. And this young woman is, I won't go into a lot of detail, but she found out she had a genetic defect
Hmm.
that didn't allow her to develop fully as a woman.
Okay.
So she didn't develop a uterus or fallopian tubes.
Oh man.
And she didn't discover this until she was a teenager.
Oh my goodness.
So you can imagine the trauma
No kidding.
and all of the fear. She comes from a great family and has really very strong faith. So the faith of the family and her faith has really helped walk through this whole thing. But you can imagine how it just changes your whole view of the future. I can't get married, or if I get married, I can't have children. And,
Right.
just what does this mean? And about identity and all of that. So I just had conversations with her, like maybe every 6 months or once a year for a couple of years. And one of the conversations was at a point when she was experiencing a lot of movement and a lot of growth, but she was talking about how she hated this part of herself
Huh.
and had judgments towards this part of herself, that she was a freak, or that she was abnormal, or that she would, she was not fully a woman, whatever those judgments were.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked her if I could pray with her, and she said yes. And I said, can we have the part of you that hates yourself and the part of you that's hated in a conversation with each other?
Yes.
Okay. So very simple parts work, and everybody can relate to this, I think.
Yep.
That if there's any place of self-rejection, there's a part of us that's rejecting ourselves and a part of us that's feeling the rejection. Right? Like the objective and the subjective,
Yep.
And so she was able to picture both of them and speak from both of those places. And so she spoke with all this rage towards herself.
Wow.
Of all of her hatred for herself and all the ways in which she was ashamed of herself and didn't want to have anything to do with her, and that she was ruining her life and everything else. And then she spoke from the part of her that was receiving that message.
Wow.
And how hurtful it was to feel so unlovable and rejected and ashamed. And, again, she's one person, but she's speaking two different parts of her reality.
Yeah.
The rejecting herself and the effect of being rejected. Just in giving voice to both parts of herself was healing. But what happened next was so beautiful. And this is, I understood what Dr. Peter was talking about last time in terms of not inviting Jesus too soon. But sometimes inviting Jesus is exactly what's needed.
Sure.
In the situation. So I said, can we invite Jesus to be with you?
Yes.
In this dialogue? And she said yes. So Jesus came. He was there, but he was visible to her. And he hugged first the part of her that was rejecting herself.
Hmm.
And then she hugged the part of her that was feeling rejected. And then he took them both and brought them together as one
Hmm.
and held her.
Wow.
From that moment forward, I got a chance to see her this year, like 6 months or a year after that prayer experience.
Hmm.
Things totally shifted for her
Wow.
in her relationship with herself and in her sense of shame about her future or hopelessness. I
Yes.
mean, it just opened up, and then God's been moving in so many different ways. But to me, that's a very simple example of parts work of the healing of self and how Jesus bringing that healing
Yes.
came after she had the freedom to articulate what was very painful to her
Yes.
in those reality. So thoughts on that?
I love the simplicity. It's very true. It's very simple and very indicative, and yet it shows the power of this kind of stuff. I mean, to put this back in context over the series we're in, relating with God, relating with self, relating with others. If we're at war within ourselves, the other two primary relationships are very difficult.
Mhm.
They're it's very hard to relate to others when you're, if we use her as an example, if she hates herself, like she might go and relate to another woman who seemingly has it all together and everything's perfect, that would change. She would be influenced by that and might relate differently.
Mhm.
She might have a major struggle in her relationship with God because she's like, why did you make me this way?
Yep.
You allowed this to happen. It just makes so much sense when you look at the three primary relationships and how relating to ourself is so central, and the power that can happen with a simple, I don't know what you call it, like an integration, a
Uh-huh.
simple bringing back together of what was not meant to be separated. And even if from the theoretical point of view, those two parts don't become one or whatever, at least they're not warring
Yeah.
against each other.
Yeah.
They're supporting.
As you're describing that, I'm remembering another piece. She recently came to a conference, and at the conference, in that experience, she had a healing with Jesus,
Hmm.
but she was still having difficulty with God the Father. So in her heart, she was separating Jesus from the Father, even though
Yes.
they're one.
Yes.
And she was feeling safe with Jesus and angry and hurt and feeling
Yeah.
rejected by the Father.
Yeah.
And at the conference, she had this huge healing with the Father.
Hmm.
But she said, I couldn't have had the healing with the Father unless I first had the healing with Jesus and then the healing with myself. That they
Wow.
had to happen in that order for me to be able to experience that healing with the Father.
Why do you think that was? And how could that relate to maybe other people?
Well, I think because as long as she's in shame and feeling defective and feeling unlovable, and no matter what she reads in scripture about being fearfully and wonderfully made, she says, yeah, everybody but me,
Hmm.
right? So she can have the theological understanding,
Right.
but her heart understanding, until this place of her heart gets healed, she's seeing through a distorted filter, a distorted lens. She's seeing God through the lens of her own self-hatred,
Wow.
right?
Yes.
And almost, this is a little bit of a stretch, but almost the self-hatred part becomes the image of God,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yep.
And when she heals that and she begins to move forward in terms of accepting herself, then she can receive that what happened with Jesus is also the heart of the Father towards her.
Right. We've talked about it before, I feel like, but she's looking at the world through lenses,
Yeah.
and those lenses are made up of experiences and judgments and vows, etc., i.e. the anatomy of a wound.
Yeah.
And when it's full of all this distortion and you look through that lens, it distorts what's on the other side. And so the distortion was cleared up with Jesus, but wasn't with the Father, because she must have had some lingering judgments or doubts, etc., which she's a good example because, her situation might feel unique, but the internal dynamic is not unique at all.
Mhm.
Everybody's had the disruption. So I can recall in my own story, two dynamics pop up. One is in my long struggle with sexual addiction. I hated the part of me that perpetually went back to that sin.
Yeah.
And I was cruel with it. And why do you do this? And look at what, just awful. And a lot of the integration for me, which was very interesting. So how my story goes, it's interesting to recall this right now in this context. When I first, everything came into the light, and by the grace of God, I started working with some really great people in the area of healing, and they did this kind of work. No wonder I'm a fan of it. But I remember being in a particular session, and I'm sitting in the chair. I'm sitting there with the therapist, and the boy who was exposed to pornography at 6 years old was across the room.
Wow.
And I'm in a weird situation because you're where it all started, and look at where it's got us, and we're in a heap of mess right now. And yet he's 6.
Yeah.
And it's not his fault. And he didn't choose it. And so it created this dynamic of, I was invited into relating to that part of me, to forgive, to love, exactly what you're talking about with this gal. And that was a very powerful turning point in my life of realizing, man, I've been really cruel to a 6-year-old part of me that has been carrying like intense shame and trying so hard to make it work, or, like he's 6. And so anyway, I can really resonate.
Yeah, that's a great example. And last time or 2 times ago, we talked about healing the relationship with God. And like for many of us, when we have that self-hatred, like you described,
Yeah.
for sin,
Yeah.
we believe that God hates us for sin.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That when I go to confession, I'm not going because I'm going to a merciful God. I'm going to relieve temporarily his hatred of me. His rejection of me. Right? And once that healing internally in the heart happens, you can then begin to experience, all these scriptures about the Lord being merciful and compassionate and kind. They're true. They're true.
Yes. And you can't see them, and without the self-hatred being addressed. And I like, it was very much, I have to go to confession so I don't go to hell.
Yeah.
That was the primary reason to go. It had very little to do with relationship at first. It was all about, because I'm intolerable, I'm unacceptable, I'm, all these rejecting kind of phrases. And what was interesting about it, which kind of leads us to the next topic, which we'll get to next episode, which is relationship with others. It was through the disposition of the priest that it was very helpful for me to go, oh boy, how come I'm working the meter on confession here. Like I'm going all the time, and for some reason that was important. No priest ever got upset with me for confessing the same thing over and over and over again. And I just want to remind priests, when the person comes back for the 49th time for the same sin, and you can predict almost when they're coming, your patience goes a long way. It's part of a healing. For me, that was an essential part of the healing process, was how other people, the priest in this case, treated the part of me coming full of shame and having fallen again.
Yeah. And I think this is, again, going to come over into the next time, but how impactful that was, not just in your relationship with yourself and your relationship with God, but how you then had this compassion for people in their sin.
Yes.
Coming out of that experience that you couldn't have had without it.
Very true.
And so love your neighbor as yourself. We also hate our neighbor as ourselves.
The opposite is true, whether you realize it or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very true. Like I have no problem being patient with somebody who's sinned pretty egregiously. I know what it's like.
Yeah.
I know their world.
Yeah.
Another topic comes up, Bob, that I think is really important. We're talking on a deeper level with the parts, maybe vulnerable parts. If we zoom out a little bit, I think something that's fascinating for me, I'm coming to greater realization about how strong particular parts are that almost do most of my life. Dr. Peter's phrase was who drive the bus,
Yeah.
and there's who they're like the primary engager, the first one on the scene in any given situation in life. That insight to me is huge, 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 huge. And I'm just recently coming to greater awareness about how prevalent and pervasive this part is. And I in my little bits of awareness that I'm growing in, I don't know if it's manager, protector, some of the language gets confusing to me, but I have a part that is the primary part that engages most of life at first take. And it is a doer part. It's a part of me that wants to do it well, do it all, do it right, and work harder, do more. And the dilemma is that the doing, like the list of things to do or to manage, never ends. There's always something else. And so it gets really overwhelming very, very quickly. And so the reason I bring it up is it's such an important reflection to ask ourselves, is it possible that a part of me that I call normal is actually leading the most of my life, which isn't maybe who I am or who God designed me to be? Does that resonate with you? Do you know the same thing?
Yeah, very much so. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I can relate very much. I mean, one of the places that I keep running up against, I call it self-righteousness, but it's a part of me that wants to be good enough
Huh.
on my own,
Right.
and right about something. And
Yes.
I, when I did some of my healing work, I called it Good Boy Bob,
Wow.
and it's Bob, but it's distorted by this fear of doing it wrong or fear of not being good enough,
Yes.
and those places are, talk about confession. I now bring that to confession all the time because I realize this is stronger than I am.
Wow. What do you mean?
Like, I've tried to address that by my own will, but I just keep running up against the same thing.
Yes.
It's just like you can't, as my spiritual director once said, you can't heal pride with more pride. You can't, you can't,
Yeah, the math doesn't
you
work.
can't
Yeah.
fix your own pride.
Right.
You
Right.
can come to the Father. So yes, I'm very aware of places in me that are not in freedom,
Hmm.
that have been there for as much of my life as I can recognize. And they're places where I need the most grace and the most mercy,
Right.
because those are places that I can begin to reject myself or judge myself, just like you're describing.
Would you feel comfortable sharing a bit more about those in the hopes that our listeners could associate and go, gosh, mine's just like Bob, or it's not like that, but I understand it. Maybe we could both go back and forth a little bit about what that looks like to help raise awareness. Would that be okay?
Yeah. As I've done the kind of the reflection and prayer with this,
Yeah.
I recognize that, again, my awareness doesn't go back before this, but I recognize that going back to like 4 and 5 years old, being very sensitive
Hmm.
to people being angry, and people weren't angry a lot in my environment,
Mm-hmm.
but occasionally my dad, who was generally kind,
Mm-hmm.
would get irritable and lose his temper.
Yes.
And I don't have full memory of this, but I have a sense that I made a vow at that point that I'm not going to be angry like that because
Yes.
I felt the hurt. But more than that, I'm not going to do anything that's going to allow me to be the object of that anger.
Okay.
So I'd see it expressed at my brother or something
Right.
like that. So my brother who's getting in trouble, I'm going to be good boy Bob.
Okay. Okay.
So what began to develop is I did a lot of the same things my brother did. We'd go smoke cigarettes or drink or steal or something,
Yeah.
but I would hide it.
Hmm.
Right? So there's a part of me that's in shame hiding.
Hmm.
And then this demeanor that's pleasing and doing everything right. And so it creates a separation
Right.
right in that. And then it kind of escalated once the brokenness in the family happened where, my parents divorced and my dad's unfaithfulness and my brother's drug addiction, now everything got heightened.
Mm,
It's like now there's much more at stake here, and there's like this need to be good enough and to do it right turns into a fearful, I've got to be perfect.
mm,
I've got to take care of everybody else, and I can't be like my mom who's fallen apart, or my dad who's gone off the deep end, or my brother who's just numbing himself.
mhm,
Uh, and so again, stuff we've talked about: fear, judgments, vows. But what it creates is this split into this part of me that's functioning and performing
mm,
rather than my true heart.
mm.
So
What does it look like? I'm hearing you say that there's a part of you that comes forward to live life in any particular way based on how you read the room or the situation or whatever.
yeah,
It sounds like two things, so that you don't, one, have people get angry,
uh-huh,
and then two, have the same kind of situation happen like what happened to you when your parents split. So is that true?
yeah,
It's like managing it's avoiding two primary
yeah.
things.
It's survival on two different fronts.
Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's surviving from being whatever the threat is of being yelled at or being somebody being angry.
Right.
But then it's much bigger survival, which is that threat of everything's falling apart and nothing's going to be okay, and I've got to
Right.
hold it all together.
When did you realize that this was going on? Because I'm trying to think of the listener out there who's like, two things are coming to my mind. One is I imagine there are some people listening to this going, "What the heck? I don't want to listen to this. I don't," and not realizing that might be the part we're talking about. Like,
Yeah,
um, you weren't always aware
yeah,
that this was the case. What did it look like before you were aware? How did you compensate and react? And how did the awareness process go?
yeah. I became aware in my late 20s when I started doing my healing work, and that was after kind of being driven there by a lot of intense anxiety and panic.
Okay.
Okay. So the panic was the feeling of losing control,
There we go.
and it was stuff trying to surface that I didn't know.
Right.
And this control part of me, this protector part of me, trying to keep it under, but it was like the force of all of the deeper buried stuff was pushing up against that.
Right.
And so that battle between trying to keep it all down and in control. Again, I wasn't aware of it at the time. I just
Sure.
later, as doing the work, trying to keep it all down, and the part that was just kind of exploding up
Hmm.
to be paid attention to, that created the panic, the anxiety.
So it started with anxiety and panic. That was the kind of some of the first symptoms.
Yeah.
And then as you moved forward.
Yeah, and so as I moved into therapy and I began to see what was underneath that, my dad leaving and the abandonment pain and
Wow.
the rejection and the fear and the vows and the choices, again, over time
Yeah.
became clear. So up until that point, I was just going along life and was, as my younger brothers say, I was the opposite side of the coin of my brother Dave.
Interesting.
Like, they looked at my brother Dave as what not to be, and then
Right.
they looked at me in some ways of what to be, but in other ways of not to be because I was so tightly wound in terms of being good.
I get you. So yeah, that's, I think, really valuable because your anxiety, which is so common right now. And I think this is where the value of some of this work is in our relating to ourselves. You had a relationship with your anxiety that you didn't really know or understand, but the primary was managing your anxiety.
Yeah.
But as you went deeper, your anxiety was coming from this, on one hand, oh gosh, a lot could go wrong if this doesn't go right. All really bad things can happen and they're terrifying. And another part going, then I've got to make sure that it all goes right. It's like getting up to bat and saying, if you don't hit a grand slam every time,
Yeah.
the whole season's over. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like that's intense pressure.
That is intense pressure. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah. Thankfully, I didn't do that to myself as an athlete.
Yeah, thankfully.
But
Yeah.
in the moral life, it's, there's more at stake. There's heaven and hell at stake. There's
Yeah, it's big.
survival. Yeah. And anxiety is the emotion of threat, right?
Huh.
Anxiety is the signal that I feel threatened.
Wow.
And yet oftentimes it's an unknown threat. You don't know what the threat is. You just react in anxiety.
Could we take it one step further? Then I'll jump on the operating table.
Yeah.
But one of the things that Dr. Peter said, which I thought was really cool, and maybe you can share it with us. Like he said, your true self. He was talking about true self. And he said, at least this is how I heard it, who you are at your best.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how all that might work with what does this look like with this picture you've laid out of your internal world? Then who are you at your best? Because it doesn't feel like all of this would be thrown out the window.
No, it's not. I wrote a poem many years ago, coming in my healing process, and I don't think I can. I don't have it right in front of me. Maybe for
Sure.
another time. Maybe we'll do this for
Okay.
another time. But it went something like this: many images I have of me, parts.
Huh.
I don't know which. Many images I have of me. I don't know which that I might be, or which of these does God decree.
Wow.
And then I go in and talk about the teenage part that I rejected.
Huh.
And when all this was going on, and then the part of me that had it all together in the rest of my teenage years and young adulthood,
Mhm.
and then this integrated part of me that was able to be vulnerable and able to laugh and able to be warm and affectionate and not have to be in charge. And so I was really describing all three of those: the wounded part, the protected part,
Yes.
the managing part, and then the real self.
Wow.
And so the poem was kind of a discovery as I'm writing the poem of these three parts of myself and the integration, and I end the poem with, I realize that I may be all three of these,
Hmm.
and that, the integrated me integrates the other two parts in a healthy way.
Wow. That's beautiful. So people might not have context for this, but it's helpful even for me, and it brings it into the reality of our relationship. But when we play cornhole, I see the play come out a bit more. You'll rib me a little bit, which is, we goof off a little more. Would
Yep.
you say that you're more in your true self there?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Probably. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one prayer experience with a spiritual director, and she had me just in this meditation time when I felt really alive. And I didn't play soccer until I was 28. All my kids and grandkids were all soccer players, but I wasn't a soccer player.
They're like great soccer players too.
Yeah. And I was 28. I was at football, basketball, baseball.
Right.
But it was an image of me as an adult running on the soccer field, just full blast with abandon, going to get the ball to make an interception of it. And there was something in that was so true of me as a child, just loving to run everywhere and just this abandon, this freedom of running and just athletic and involved and physical. And
Yes.
that's what you see when I play cornhole a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. There's not a lot of running, but
No, there's not a lot of running.
I love that image. What a beautiful image. I can picture it with you.
Yeah.
It's not gritty running. It's free running.
It's free.
Right.
And it's full force, and it's powerful and athletic and yet fun, just joy.
Yes.
Just joy.
I love that image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sports was always a place where I could just be me. My brothers joke about linebacker Bob. They used to grow up watching me play.
Right.
And, you wouldn't catch from my normal demeanor that I was this linebacker who, could make these big collisions on the football field and stuff.
Right. Right. And didn't you play college?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another thing that's like the secret stories of Bob Schuchts. Like
Yeah.
you weren't just a guy who played in, flag football with your buddies. Like you were a linebacker in college.
Yeah. And the problem was in high school, I had a coach who instilled a lot of confidence. A couple of different coaches instilled a lot of confidence, and I just played with abandon, and I loved playing.
Yeah.
In college, I had a coach. I was at Columbia. I had a coach on my defensive linebacker coach, was very heady.
Okay.
And he got me to be perfect.
Oh, man.
And so this protector part of me came in and stole the spontaneous, free player. And I would get so bound up in having to do it right
My goodness.
that I lost my really freedom of playing, and it got so frustrated. And then it'd get so bad, I'd go down in the depth chart, and I'd just go back to my old self and kind of make my way back up. But it was just like this struggle.
Wow. So that's fascinating. He activated the protector part.
Yep.
And then your skill that got you to play in college faded.
Yep. Yep. Not only my skill, but my abandon, that
Right.
free person.
Which a linebacker needs to have when he
Oh,
goes into
absolutely.
a hole, right?
Yeah,
If he goes in
absolutely.
soft, he's going to get run
Yeah.
over by the other guy coming through the hole.
Yeah.
That's wow. I appreciate the narrative. So this is literally last night. I'm sitting there last night and with Heather on the couch, and I'm managing anxiety, which I'm used to managing, but at times and as of late, it has increased, and so the intensity of it has increased, and so I go into oh no, it's really bad. I wonder if I'm having a heart attack and I'm going to die. And maybe that sounds intense, but that's right where I go, which causes me even more panic.
Yeah.
And I can remember even being little of being afraid of getting sick. I don't know where that comes from. And I've even talked to my brothers. One of my brothers in particular has shared, like, he's like, "Are you afraid of getting sick all the time?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And we don't understand, but both of us have that same fear.
I think I have a sense of that.
Oh,
That was what happened when your mom got sick and had to go to the hospital.
that makes a lot of sense. I would have been too young probably to comprehend what sick meant, but I knew
Right.
what that meant, and that it was emotionally deadly,
Yep. It was, talk about threat, that's survival right there.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Man, I haven't put that together. So last night, I'm feeling the midst of this, and I've gone through this cycle before, so I'm trying to manage my internal world, and it's not going well. And I'm literally having thoughts like, well, Lord, if I die, I die. If I have a heart attack, I have a heart attack. Like, what a weird thing. So I go into my bedroom and just say, I need some space, and I'm just going to pray. I'm just going to I don't have necessarily a lot of hope that anything's going to happen, but I'm like, I'm getting down to the bottom of the barrel here.
Yeah.
Like, TV's not working, popcorn's not working. I'm going through my list of survival tools. And so I start with just a basic, like, I use some deliverance prayers, and I just start praying some deliverance prayers, and I feel this little shift. I'm pretty attuned to my inner world, and like little shifts or something's gotten better or worse, which is really annoying when you don't want it to be there, because you're like, oh, something just changed. What happened? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I feel a little shift from the deliverance prayer. And so then I put on my earbuds, and I'm listening to music that I usually listen to when I pray. And it's very, very calming. It's very soothing. It doesn't have words. And I don't know why this happened, but I start thinking about parts, and maybe it's all the stuff we've been doing and Dr. Peter and all of that. And for some reason, I think to relate to myself. And I think, I don't remember the exact sequence, but what I do remember is saying to myself, gosh, you're managing a lot, and it's okay. It's okay. I was just being kind to myself. And it moved along, and then all of a sudden, and I asked this part of me that feels this pressure, would you be okay to just take a little break? And when I did, I felt my body like lighten a little bit, and then I lost it emotionally. I just started weeping, and, like, people say ugly face cry. Like, I was
Mhm.
crying so much that I was losing my breath, and
Yeah.
I was gasping for air on
Yeah.
the tail end of the sobbing. I don't know how to explain it other than it was very, very deep.
Yeah.
And then right there, I just started saying to the Lord, like, please save me.
Mhm.
Like, please save
Mhm.
me, save me. And I'm crying that out, which is making the crying go
Mhm.
even more. But what
Yeah.
I'm feeling is this manager part of me. It's like I'm starting, well, before I get there, the Lord came near, and I heard, it was very simple, I'm here.
Yeah.
And that just I lost it even deeper. Like I'm actually feeling it right now. I'm
Yeah.
containing myself.
I can see it.
Yeah. So he said, I'm here,
Yeah.
and that comfort made it even more emotional. And so the manager part of me is like to the side, not gone away, not in shame, just resting. Like you
Yeah.
don't have to take care of it. And then I felt like the Lord just began to show me all the places that this part tries to manage and take care of. And honestly, Bob, I couldn't think of a place that it wasn't trying to manage.
Wow.
From work to family to ministry to my prayer life.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to go, no wonder prayer is so hard.
Yeah.
Because this part is doing both sides of the relationship.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
and I'm all the while I'm just weeping and kind of afraid that I'm going to be crying so loud that Heather's going to like, are you okay? What's going on? So I'm trying to silent cry it. So even there, I'm managing it a bit. And then the Lord just, again, these are spontaneous movements. And I know the difference between me praying to myself versus me praying to the Lord, because the fruit is dramatically different. I don't really give much fruit. I don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
But then I noticed the Lord just kind of very gently look over, and Mary and Joseph walked in, and I lost it again because they drew near.
Yeah.
And I'm just with them, and I'm going, I can't. I'm just admitting. And before this had happened, I felt like I heard the Lord say, the third line, look at the third line. And I was like, I've heard these things a million times. It's probably my manager part trying to talk for God. And I always get disappointed because it's not God speaking. And I actually looked at the gospel. It meant nothing. The third line of the gospel for the day meant nothing. And then when I'm having this movement, the thought comes back, and I look on my phone, and I'm listening to the third song. And the third song is titled, I Surrender.
Oh, wow.
And I went, oh boy. So then a whole other wave of emotional relief and weeping.
Wow.
And then to finish it up, I feel this desire in me, and I'm feeling very vulnerable. The manager part is to the side, again, not shame, just being comforted. I don't even know by who. I don't even know what's going on there with him, but he's okay. And I feel this desire to, this might sound very intimate, but I feel this desire to like snuggle up to Jesus. Like I want to be taken care of.
Yeah.
And so I literally turn in my bed, and I'm kind of in a fetal position on my side in the pillow, and I'm more tears. And the Lord brings me to the image of him asleep on the boat in the storm. And I'm going, I will be right here next to you, Lord. That's where I know I'll be okay. And I'm literally snuggled up to him while the boat is smashing around. And I look up, and what I sense is that as I'm looking at him, he's asleep. But what I didn't notice is that his hand is very strong around me.
Wow.
So I'm potentially deceived if I'm not careful. I look at him and going, oh, you don't care. You're asleep. You're not. But I noticed it was like he wasn't asleep, or his hand wasn't asleep, right? He was very strongly comforting me. Then the disciples wake him up, and he rebukes the storm.
Yeah.
And then we lay back down, and there's this gentle breeze just blowing across my face, which is one of the most comforting things in the world for me, is a cool breeze blowing across my face. It was powerful.
That is amazing powerful. Yeah. I mean, it's like huge movement.
Yeah.
In that. And I told you when I saw you, I could see the shift in your eyes.
Yeah.
That there was something that shifted.
Yeah.
If it's okay, if I can step back and just comment on that, because
please.
I think people can get confused with different language and different methods and everything else. And, we could use the language of a protector part and the wounded part, or we could use the language of the false self and the real self.
Yes.
Or we could use the language of a vow versus the core places of our woundedness. They're all speaking the same thing, but the vow created this place of protection, self-protection, to survive. And as you're talking about that, I'm feeling what you've described over time as that deep place of abandonment that you felt as a young child that led into the pornography use. And the pornography was a line of defense or a line of comfort.
Yeah.
As a 6-year-old, it started.
Mm.
Okay, so the realization of that, you've made that growth, and then you've now realized that the areas of comfort are much more functional now, working hard, performing well,
Very true.
all those things which you don't have as much self-hatred for, even though you're troubled by it and it creates a lot of stress.
It does.
It's more
Yeah.
acceptable to you
It's yeah.
than the other part, but it's still keeping your heart, just like mine keeps my heart, from being able to receive in prayer that intimacy that we long for.
Yes.
But we're afraid of letting go because it's survival.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we all have these places in us of that. And so what happened is it got safe enough to
Mm.
let go. And what comes pouring out of you is all this pain of being alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what Jesus do is he just gently reveals his presence, reveals Mary and Joseph's presence, which is, as a young child, what you need is mom and dad, right?
Oh,
And you
amen.
need their comfort. And, it's that place of being snuggled up against what you probably missed in those first couple of years with your mom gone
Yeah.
and your dad not being capable, just having to manage, take
Yeah.
care of everything
Yeah.
with all that. And just how long we hold that pain,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
I know when I had that experience of finally letting go in my early 30s of all the abandonment pain, and I was older,
Yeah.
so it's not as core, it's not as deep, but how much of my life had been controlled by that pain, and I was trying to control that pain, and that's what just same thing. It's another. I know you've done work there, and it's another layer of the surrender is letting go of control.
Yes.
So that's another language we could use, right? Is
Yes.
the difference between us being in control and us being in a place of trust and surrender.
Yes. Bob, but what strikes me that I haven't thought of it until we're debriefing it right now, which is the phrase that I first heard from Ralph Martin in his book, Fulfillment of All Desire, where he's quoting Teresa of Avila, and she's talking about the things that inhibited her growth in the spiritual life. And I think she said, the greatest one, but this is her phrase, self-reliance killed me.
Yeah.
And what I'm realizing right now is that this manager part, its mode is self-reliance.
Yep. It's the ungodly self-reliance we talk about. Yep.
It doesn't know any other way.
Yep.
That's how it survives.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, oh my gosh, you can't, just like you said with pride, you can't fix pride with pride. You can't fix self-reliance with self-reliance.
Well, they're one and the same.
Right. Oh, pride and self-reliance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we're wonder twins in that area. But I'm just struck right now by my self-reliance, which I was very aware of and people close to me can see and are aware of and notice. And it comes out in the podcast even, right? It's just there, is very deeply a place of managing so as to be okay.
Yeah.
And not letting the Lord in because I'm afraid.
Yeah. I hope, as we're having this conversation, I'm experiencing such reverence for your heart. I'm hoping the listeners can reverence in the same way. It's just such a beautiful vulnerability and movement that you experienced last night, and to be able to share it so fresh.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know I think honestly, that's more of my true self.
To be able to share freely. Yeah.
Yeah. I have very little inhibition to share. Parts might get hurt, if people are like, oh, that was stupid, then a protector part will come out of me, which you've probably seen, which I can get pretty intensely protective. But I think it's just I think here's the moral of two morals of the story. One is the intimacy with the Lord, and that's the primary one.
Yeah.
The secondary one, which was honestly from an intellectual point of view, overwhelming, was how prevalent the manager was.
Yeah.
I was shocked looking at my life going, why I felt like I was having a heart attack. The reason it felt like that was because the manager part was squeezing everything so tightly.
Yeah.
And honestly, when that stuff happened, that squeezing feeling was gone.
Yeah. And as you and I spoke, as I've struggled with that symptom often to the point of having to go down and get a test at one point, and my heart was fine, but just that that place where
Yes.
just that protection that just closes everything off and holds it all together.
Yeah. It's it's intense and overwhelming and isolating, etc.
Yeah.
But I wonder if we could end with a couple practicals for people. One that I thought of, and of course, my mind hops all around, but one of
Yeah.
them that I'm just thinking is I have tried to self-reliantly have a prayer experience like I had last night for
Yeah.
years, and it never happened, which is very disappointing and can lead to a lot of judgment against God. So here we are again
Yeah.
in the three primary relationships. But I think on a more basic level, I think it'd be very interesting to do an examine prayer at the end of the day that's parts centered. Where was my manager present today? Where was I my true self today? Where did I feel my wounded self was coming out, or whatever, however you want to describe it or use that language, just simply from the awareness of, man, I wonder where these parts of me are prevalent, and then inviting the Lord into it and inviting just his comfort, etc. That's one idea that came up for me.
Yeah, that's good, and I'm just bringing back to mind what Dr. Peter talked about with the real self, the true self. What was the word he said? Real self?
I
No,
can't remember. I can't remember. True
core
self.
self.
Anyway,
Uh, but he said it's confident, courageous,
yeah, all the C's.
competent, right? I don't
Yeah,
remember all the C's, but yeah. So if people are wondering what is my true self, it's the time when you felt. Let's stay with that same exercise. Let's put it into more common language of those same three things. Where did I feel like I was in control and making things happen today in self-reliance?
yes,
Where did I just feel confident and connected to God and alive and
that's
compassionate?
good.
And where did I feel a sense of brokenness and struggle and difficulty and fear and pain
Yes,
today?
that's really
Does that
good.
fit?
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. That's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or ideas about practicals from your point of view?
I think the thing I want to offer, I've been seeing it so much as I'm walking with people or have walked with people in the past,
Yeah.
is this idea of self-rejection and self-hatred. And so to just examine the thing about yourself that you are so condemning of, whether it's physically, emotionally, spiritually, whether it's an area of sin or it's an area of woundedness or an area of frustration. Just where are you frustrated, angry, condemning of yourself?
Mm.
And ask the Father how he sees you there.
Mm.
What is his vision of you there? And don't try to make anything happen. Don't try to imagine something to happen. Just leave the question there, and he may reveal it in the moment, or it may be somebody 2 days from now comes up and you know that that's the answer to your prayer,
Mm.
that what the Father wanted to communicate to you. So I know, just like you, I think you articulate it really well. I tend to, when I go to prayer, wanting, because I have the information, I want to manufacture what I know
Yep.
I want God to do, and that never works.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
It
as
doesn't.
frustrating as can be.
Yeah.
And so just that openness to say, okay, God, however you want to answer this prayer, catch me by surprise. Because if you catch me by surprise, then I can't make it happen or guard against it or whatever.
That's really good. So, Bob, next episode we go into relating to others, and I feel like before we go there, man, is it so important to do these first two episodes, get them really integrated, because that's where we often go.
Yep.
Is how do I love people? Relating, and I mean, there's just so much in that domain. So I'm looking forward to breaking that down with you regarding that being a primary relationship, but it's built upon these other two.
Yeah, you probably have this experience too, but we can probably talk about this in more depth next time. But I have people all the time saying, how do I help my child, or how do I help my
Yes.
spouse? And inevitably I say, it all flows down. So whatever healing you experience is going to help your child more than anything you could do for your child, because we try to manage in our children what we're afraid of that we've experienced. And so, yeah, that's part of hopefully what we'll discuss next week, of just in general, how does our relationship with God and our relationship with ourselves directly influence how we relate to every person around us.
Agreed. Looking forward to it. Listeners, thanks for being with us, and we hope that this episode blessed you, and we will talk to you again soon.